Good evening. How are you? Thank you so much for coming in tonight and joining us for tonight's event. It's called Spring into Safety, and that is brought to you by Lake Park Student Services Department and the Lake Park Educational Foundation. And I'm very excited to introduce to you our presenter for tonight. It's Angela Rose, and she's a Lancer for life. She was a homecoming queen at Lake Park and graduated in 1996. She was inducted as a distinguished alumni 3 years ago. Angela has dedicated the last 25 years of her life to promoting healthy relationships, consent, bystander intervention, and supporting survivors. After her own experience, Angela turned her anger into a positive force for change and helped to enact legislation in Illinois when she was a teenager. In college at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, Angela founded the nonprofit organization PAVE, which stands for Promoting Awareness, Victim Empowerment. PAVE has been on the front lines of the movement nationally and internationally for 2 decades. Angela was invited by the former First Lady of France, Cecilia Attias, to participate in the Women's Global Dialogue for Action, and was also invited to speak at the University of Oxford in England. Angela also authored the book Hope, Healing, and Happiness, Going Inward to Transform Your Life. Later tonight, you can donate to PAVE and get a signed copy of the book after the event. Angela's efforts have been profiled by Oprah Winfrey Network, BioChannel, and The Today Show. Please join me in welcoming Angela Rose.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Marta. I appreciate it. Well, good evening. I always like to start by, first of all, thanking all of you for coming out tonight. Thank you to Lake Park. So interesting for me to come back to where I graduated from. I speak across the country and abroad, so this is very special for me to come here to the halls, the hallowed halls of where I graduated from. So I always like to start by saying that this is a safe space. Undoubtedly, there's going to be people in this room, people watching, that have been impacted by trauma or violence or bullying. And so I always like to start by saying that this is a safe space. We are going to be talking about difficult issues, but what's important is we're going to be taking a very positive and a proactive approach. And we absolutely want to leave time for Q&A. I don't want to be talking at you the whole time. We absolutely want to leave time for questions. So we're going to start by giving a little bit of history on PAVE. We're going to educate you on healthy relationships and consent, bystander intervention, supporting survivors. So by the time you walk out of here tonight, you are going to be armed with the knowledge to know exactly what to say or do if someone discloses to you, which is so important. But PAVE has been on the front lines of this movement for over 2 decades. Some of our top accomplishments is I just moved back not too long ago, back from DC, where I lived for over a decade. We worked with the White House Task Force to protect students from sexual assault that was chaired by then Vice President Biden and President Obama. We worked with the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Office of Adolescent Health to talk about strategies for reducing teen dating violence. And we've done a lot of work on college campuses. We created the first ever National Campus Sexual Assault Summit that broadcasted live to over 400 colleges across the country. But I would be remiss if I didn't start for just a moment or two to talk about my own personal journey. So I was 17 years old. I had just graduated from Lake Park High School, and I was working at Woodfield Mall to pay for my upcoming college expenses. I was supposed to be going to the University of Illinois, and my life completely changed in an instant. We have no sound, sir.
Rose is this week's breakthrough woman. At 17, Angela Rose was walking to her car at a mall when she was kidnapped and sexually assaulted. Her grandmother encouraged her to heal by fighting back.
She was the first person to call me and say, I know that this was hard for you, Angela, but this happened to you for a reason. And that really is what kind of catapulted me, turning all of this frustration and anger and hurt into activism.
Please join me in welcoming Angela Rose.
In 2001, Angela founded PAVE, which stands for Promoting Awareness, Victim Empowerment. By sharing her story and using art projects like this one, she inspires other survivors to move forward.
She's really working on helping people understand that it's an experience that happened to them and that they're really working to rise above that. They're surviving, they're thriving. We can't choose what happens to us, but we can choose our response. And the way that we grow from these negative experiences can be used to help other people in their healing process. It's something that we need to do to break that cycle of violence.
A Chicago woman who was kidnapped in broad day.
There we go. So one thing that I find very important about my journey is when I went down to report what happened to me at the police station the night that I was kidnapped, the responding detective didn't believe me and accused me of lying. And that was really that first kind of instant where I knew that I wanted to try and make a difference, to make sure that what happened to me didn't happen to anyone else. Not just trying to prevent the violence, but trying to prevent the way in which survivors are oftentimes re-victimized and re-traumatized through the reporting process. Thankfully, they found 2 new detectives because literally there was nothing done on my case that night. And finally, after so much pressure was put on the police station, they put 2 new detectives on the case that were amazing. And they said, Angela, we have no reason not to believe you. And they did a sketch of his face with my help. It was called an e-fit. And it was an electronic, basically, an electronic version of the sketch. And they put it all over the Chicago News and someone recognized him. And not only had he done this before, but he was on parole for murdering a 15-year-old girl named Julie Angel. And I really consider her my guardian angel. I worked with her family, including her sister and her mother, to help enact legislation in Illinois. When I was a teenager, I was 17 when all of this was happening. And all along the journey, I kept hearing from people that they were impacted by these crimes too. Friends of my family, old high school teachers, even as old as my grandma's friends were disclosing to me that they had been impacted by some type of trauma, but overwhelmingly it was somebody that they knew and they trusted. So mine was a stranger assault, but that's not what we need to fear. Yes, it happens. It happened to me, but most of the time we're hurt by somebody that we know and we trust. But tonight, this isn't about me. This is about all of you. And every single person in this room, you might not know it, but every single one of you personally knows somebody who's been impacted by violence, abuse, or trauma. And what I'm so passionate about is awareness plus action is what equals social change. And so just why I'm so passionate about this high school age population is that 1 in 6 boys and 1 in 4 girls will be impacted by sexual abuse before the age of 18. Like, think about that. Every one of us knows somebody. Girls and young women between the ages of 16 and 24 experience the highest rate of intimate partner violence. And only 33% of teens who were in a violent relationship ever told anyone about the abuse. So what are some main issues? How is this so widespread? Yes, the Me Too movement has happened. It's a little bit more talked about, but there's still so many issues. So what do we see? We live, unfortunately, in a very victim-blaming society. We'll talk about that. There's so much perceived shame. You know, I blamed myself for so long. So I am here tonight to tell you that there is no shame in being a survivor. That shame is not something that it is not our fault. And for anybody listening, if you've had any experience with trauma in your life, it is not your fault. It's vastly underreported. Oftentimes, people are re-traumatized by institutions, and there really is a lack of support. So I want to talk for a minute about the myths, because I think it's important to, when we talk about shattering the silence, we need to know that the truth matters and to shatter the myths. So let's talk about that for a minute. So a lot of times people think that most violence and crimes are perpetuated by strangers, that the strangers are the ones creating these crimes, but most of the time, over 80 to 90% of the time, it's somebody that we know and we trust. It's a date, it's an acquaintance, it's a coach, it's a babysitter, it's a family member, it's somebody that is known and trusted to us. And one myth that some people believe is that most assaults involve violence or a weapon. But most assaults are not violent. Other ways include use of drug or alcohol, coercion, threats, or guilt. So most oftentimes there is no weapon involved. Another myth is that false allegations and reports are common, but the fact is that false reports are in line with any other crime. It's less than 5%. And this is important too. A lot of times people think that victims should respond by fighting back or running away. So many of my friends that I graduated with, that I worked with at Woodfield Mall, said to me, well, Angela, why didn't you run away or why didn't you fight back? But oftentimes when survivors are in these situations, we freeze. It's not just fight or flight, but there's real neurobiological reasons that really we freeze in our tracks. And so that there's no right way to respond, and oftentimes we can't control our response. So that's very important for us to understand. Another myth is that only women experience sexual and dating violence, but we know that 1 in 6 men and boys have. And healing sometimes can be harder for men because of toxic masculinity, social stigma. And so I always like to interweave different people's experiences. So we work with 2 male survivors that are just amazing. The first, raise your hand if you've seen American Ninja Warrior or at least heard of the show on NBC. Oh, pretty much everybody. Great. So Flip Rodriguez has been a contestant for over 10 years, 10 seasons. And in the beginning, he would always wear a mask. And so people would always ask, why do you wear the mask, Flip? And so he came out on national television and said that he was a male survivor of sexual abuse. It was his father that was his perpetrator. And he removed the mask and said, I'm removing this mask because it is not my shame anymore. And I want people to know and to understand it. When he came out on NBC, before his mom even knew, he talked about this publicly. He was just overwhelmed by support, by so many people disclosing on Twitter and on social media, thanking him for his voice, for this tough guy to stand up and say, this happens. The fact that he was so vulnerable just helped give so many other people strength. We just had John Vaughn, who's a former NFL player. He played for the Patriots and the Chiefs, and he was abused at the University of Michigan by the team doctor, very similar to the Larry Nassar case. 1,000 victims at the University of Michigan, and the university knew, and they did nothing. So he's very passionate about shattering the silence. Another myth is that if someone waits to come forward, they're probably making it up or they're lying. But there's many reasons why somebody isn't going to come forward right away. Maybe they have fear. They need some time to even realize what happened to them was abuse or violence. There's so many reasons why people don't speak out about it right away. Another myth is that, if that person wasn't charged, then it didn't happen. Well, many survivors don't report out of fear. And this is very interesting. Out of 1,000 crimes, 1,000 rapes, 994 perpetrators will walk free. This is from RAINN, the Rape, Abuse, Incest National Network. Only 310, as I mentioned before, these types of crimes are the most underreported to the police. Only 310 out of these 1,000, when you extrapolate, are reported to the police. Only 57 lead to the arrest. 11 cases get referred to the prosecutor. 7 cases will lead to a felony conviction, and only 6 out of 1,000 will ever spend 1 day in prison. And that's why there's so many misconceptions about this. And there's so much victim blaming, that they asked for it. How much did they have to drink? Why didn't they fight back? What was the person wearing? I was asked in court what I was wearing when I left my job at Woodfield Mall. I was wearing a pantsuit, but if I was wearing a red mini skirt or a red mini dress, should that make a difference? Absolutely not. But oftentimes we use this victim blaming language that we want to change. There's also so much bullying. You would think, I would hope, in high school, when you come out to your friends if something happens, that they would be supportive. I want to share with you a story of a PAVE ambassador named Delaney Henderson. She was in high school when she was assaulted by 2 boys that went to her high school. And not only was she not supported by her friends, she was bullied so badly that she had to move out of state and change schools. There was a lot of issues that she had with depression and anxiety and suicidal thoughts. And all of this could have been avoided if her peers knew what to say or do to support her. There's May, I'm very passionate about mental health, and May is Mental Health Awareness Month. And here we are in May. And I want you to understand that oftentimes the root of a lot of these things that you see up here is trauma. So we see a lot of eating disorders because violence is a crime of power and control. And oftentimes survivors, we feel like our power has been taken away. And one way that we can try and get our power back, one young lady created a documentary film years ago, and she talked about how she was abused when she was 5, sexually abused at her church, actually. And she had these feelings that she didn't know what to deal with. She didn't know how to deal with them. So she started to starve herself because she said that it was very easy for her to control what she put into her body. So that was a way of regaining control in her life. She was down to 70 pounds in high school. And then she got the help for it, but then again she started to feel these feelings and she started to cut herself. And she said in this video so powerfully, she said, you know, physical pain is so much easier to understand than emotional pain. Because physical pain is right there. You see it, you understand it, you know what it is. But when it's emotional pain, it's invisible, and it was so hard for her. But it wasn't just, you know, these aspects. It was the root of it was the trauma, but no doctor asked about that. We see a lot of depression and anxiety, alcohol and drug misuse. Oftentimes survivors, we just want to numb ourselves to stop feeling this pain. A lot of post-traumatic stress. And it's funny because when you're in it, you don't see it. I remember I went away to college at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. This was, you know, a couple of years. I ended up going to community college to go through the court system. And when I went away to school, I would constantly feel like there was somebody behind me. So I would walk to class with my hand over my throat. My perpetrator, he came up and put a knife to my throat. So I constantly had this fear that someone was behind me. I would wash my face at night feeling like there was somebody behind me, but never did I put two and two together that it was because of that traumatic experience. I mean, it seems so obvious now, but when survivors are in it, we can't see it. And so I was able to get amazing, it took me probably 8 years to go to therapy because, you know, I thought it was a sign of weakness. But what I realized is that asking for help is actually a huge sign of strength. And so I was able to get treatment to treat me for those, you know, really paralyzing thoughts and feelings. And so that was very helpful. A lot of trust issues and a lot of suicidal thoughts and tendencies. This is very timely, and I put this in just last night because it just came out. As we all know, Naomi Judd died by suicide. And one thing that we've known in the public eye that she's been a long-time mental health advocate. She's been very vulnerable and very open about her struggles with mental health. What she told People magazine in 2016 that nobody can understand until you've been there. What people aren't talking about, but what I know to be true, is that she is a sexual abuse survivor. And she came out, this is from 2020, that she wasn't sure she was going to make it at all. We found out that she was sexually abused as a child. When she was 18 years old, her first time that she ever had sex in high school, it was not consensual. Then after that, when she was 22, she was also abused sexually and physically by a partner. And so I just want everyone to understand that when we see people going through things, we don't often understand that the root of it is oftentimes trauma. And it's so important for us to understand that. And again, this is not a women's issue. This is not a political issue. This is a human rights issue that every single person has an opportunity to make a profound difference in the world and in the lives of an individual survivor. So what's the solution? We've talked a lot about the problem, right? This is a huge problem in our society. We know that everybody knows somebody. We know that we all know somebody who's been impacted. But what can we do? What's the solution? How can we change the world? We need to educate about consent. We're going to talk about that briefly. We're going to talk about bystander intervention. We're going to talk about supporting survivors and healthy relationships and how each and every one of you can get involved to make a difference. We also know that there's a lot of gender stereotypes that lead into toxic masculinity. So what does it mean to be a stereotypical male? What does it mean to be a stereotypical female? So let's talk about that for a second. When we talk about a stereotypical male, what are some things that we call like a sexually active male? Shout it out. What are some things? Anything. What do you think? Macho, absolutely. What else? Good looking. He's a stud. All these like very positive sounding phrases, right? But then when we talk about a sexually active female, what do we say? What are some words to describe us from a gender stereotype? What is it? Tramp, slut. Exactly. All these very negative sounding stereotypical words, right? And so that leads into the rape culture in which we live. And, you know, our media, Hollywood, certainly does not do any services to all of us in talking about what is consent. So when we talk about consent, what is consent? It's a freely given yes, not the absence of a no. A freely given yes, not the absence of a no. And that's very important. We're going to dig a little bit deeper on that. So we'd like to come up with fun little, acronyms so you can remember things. So consent, you're going to need fries with that. So what is consent when we talk about this? So F in fries is freely given. No pressure, no manipulation, no coercion. R is reversible. It can be withdrawn at any point. Maybe you were comfortable with something, 5 minutes later you're not. That consent can be reversed at any point. Informed, without the use of deception. Enthusiastic, without hesitation. And sober, without the use of drugs or alcohol. Because oftentimes in high schools and on college campuses, we see alcohol-facilitated sexual assault and drug-facilitated sexual assault. So someone trying purposely to get somebody incapacitated to take advantage of them. And also, before you make your move, remember consent moves. And what does that mean? Mutual, ongoing, verbal, enthusiastic, and specific/sober. So those are just some fun ways to understand and remember consent. And when we think about consent, oftentimes we don't think about digital consent. We think about in person. And I teach my 2- and 5-year-old about consent, right? It's like, can I hug you? Can I hold your hand? Even with tickling, we have a game where it's like I tickle my kiddos and they say stop and I stop right away. I teach them that their body autonomy is theirs. So we can start teaching these concepts of consent very early. But with digital consent, you need consent before sending someone any sexual photos, videos, messages. No one should ever feel pressured to send sexual content of themselves. And we're seeing this a lot in high schools. Sending and receiving and asking for these types of images. And it's very dangerous, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. We'll dig a little bit deeper into that momentarily. But what's bystander intervention? We hear this term. Does anybody know what bystander intervention is? When somebody gets involved, when they see something. So let's dig deeper. When we talk about bystander, what is that? It's a person, any person that witnesses any act of violence, okay? What's interesting is the bystander effect is that the more bystanders, the more people that witness an act of violence, the less likely it is that anyone's going to call for help. Think about that. The more people that are around, the less likely it is that anyone's going to call for help. Well, why is that? Well, there's a lot of reasons why that is. Imagine this big circle around. Actually, this happened not too long ago at a high school homecoming dance. There was a sexual assault that was happening right outside the dance. People were standing around watching it, posting it on social media. There was probably 20 other students that watched this happen, and not one person either called the police or went in to get help from a teacher. Not one. Why? We think that somebody else is going to do it. We think that if nobody else is saying or doing anything, well, then it must be okay. Maybe we're just not sure what to say or do. Maybe we're concerned about our own well-being or our own safety. And so I'm here to tell you that it is so important to follow that inner knowing. How often have we felt that inner knowing that something's wrong? Maybe we're seeing some bullying online and we're not sure what to do, so we just ignore it. Well, we all have a stake in making a difference, not only in our community, in our schools, but in the lives of individual people. So how to be an active bystander? Delay. Reach out to that person that's harmed. Direct, confront the perpetrator. Disrupting by changing the situation. Distract, divert the attention from the perpetrator, telling them, oh, their car's being towed, making up something that might not be true, but distracting that person. And delegating, arranging for someone else to intervene who might be more trained in this. So there's so many different ways to become an active bystander. So now that we've talked about bystander intervention, let's talk about healthy versus unhealthy relationships, because this is a very important part of as we grow. And I know I've been doing this work in high schools for a while, so I know people don't usually use the word relationship or dating. It's called different things. But when we talk about an unhealthy, let's say an interaction, unhealthy relationship, what are some characteristics of an unhealthy relationship? Shout it out. What are some things? Controlling, absolutely. Good one. What else? Jealousy, yes, absolutely. What else? Arguing, absolutely. Jealousy and distrust, codependence, fear, lack of support for the things that you enjoy, manipulation, and this is a big one, guilt for spending time with friends and family. So isolation, forced sexual contact, and the threat of violence. And even grooming. This is really important for this age range. Junior high and high school students, we see a lot of grooming from people that we are taught to trust, whether it be a coach or a teacher or a family member, a neighbor, a babysitter, somebody in our life that we're taught to trust. And grooming is the process in which this happens. It's a tactic where the perpetrator gradually works to lower a survivor's defenses by building that emotional connection with them and pushing boundaries until that abuse appears normal. So there's that targeting stage, the friendship forming stage, that loving relationship stage, and then the abuse. And we did this amazing lunch and learn. This woman, Michelle Denault, who is not only an educator, but she's a survivor. And I would really encourage you to watch this. We videotape all of our content, so that's on our website. But for any parent, any teacher, this is so profound, and she just really breaks it down. It's called Grooming 101, A Predator's Playbook. And she comes at, like I said, from two lenses, which is very powerful. But we can't talk about all the unhealthy and negative stuff without talking about the positive. So let's talk about the healthy relationships. What are some characteristics of a healthy relationship? Shout it out. Trusting. What else? Loving. Yes. Supportive. Yes. Supportive. Respect of oneself and each other. Good communication. Equality. True comfort in being your true self. Having a strong friendship. And a sense of interdependence with mutual responsibility. So this is really important for this day and age. Growing up, for some of my classmates here in the room, we didn't have to deal with a lot of this online and cyber safety and issues, but there's a lot of unhealthy digital behaviors that we need as parents and educators to be aware of. So technology can absolutely be used to abuse. Just because it happened on a screen doesn't mean that it can't cause harm. And oftentimes it can be extremely harmful. So we're going to be talking about some of these issues: unsolicited pictures, stalking, non-consensual image distribution, harassment, digital control, and doxing. So unsolicited pictures is sending nudes to another person without their consent. It can be very traumatizing. It is not harmless. Stalking. Online stalking is still stalking. Following someone's every move on social media is an absolute invasion of privacy. People don't think about that. They think that stalking has to be in person where the person's following you. Well, they can certainly be following you in your digital footprint. Non-consensual image distribution. So distributing or possessing intimate pictures or videos without the individual's consent is certainly a form of abuse. Harassment. Sending graphic or derogatory messages online is an unfair way to take over someone's online experience. Digital control, forcing you to share texts and passwords, controlling who you follow, lashing out against you digitally are all unhealthy behaviors. Doxing. I've never heard about this. I learned about this recently. Sharing personal, private, or sensitive information online. And that also can really put somebody at risk. I want to share with you my friend Alicia. She was 13. This was years ago, but she started talking to somebody online that she thought was her friend. She thought that it was somebody in her age group. She thought that it was somebody that she could trust. She thought that it was a peer. Well, it turned out it was a 30-year-old predator. She arranged to meet him. She thought they were just going to hang out. Again, she thought she was talking to somebody her same age, and he kidnapped her. Thankfully, the FBI were able to follow her digital footprint, and she was rescued and saved. She founded this amazing organization called the Alicia Project, and so she has some cyber safety tips for all of us that I want to share because she knows it so personally. Number one is any child or teen can become the victim of an internet predator. It happens. We don't want to think that it can happen, but it happens, and it is happening right now. Teach your child or teen to never share private or identifying information. Remind your child or teen to choose their online handle or username carefully because there can be information that can lead to them being discovered or found, and much information can be inferred from those usernames. Monitor their activity on the computer. Don't feel like you're spying on your child. You're the parent. It's your responsibility. Know the passwords on devices. Educate yourself on the mobile applications that your child or teen is using. Ask for an explanation or demonstration. And I think this is really important. Maintain a loving, open, respectful line of communication with your child or your teen, and assure them that they can always talk to you. I had an amazing support network from my family that so many survivors don't have. And that, without question, helped my healing process because I knew I could come to my mom. I knew I could come to my grandmother and tell them these things that happened to me. And it made all the difference in the world. So let's shift gears. And we've talked about the problem. We've talked about the education. Now let's talk about how all of you can actively be a part of the solution. So you can educate yourself. We have 3 courses that are free for all of you to take on PAVE University. Encourage your friends to take our courses on bystander intervention, on consent, survivor support. I mentioned before, we always record all of our webinars. We just had one this last week, and it was all about the notion of codifying consent. What that means is making sure that the law is keeping up with what consent means. I was there for the Bill Cosby case to support the survivor, Andrea Constant. And with the Cosby case and with the Weinstein case, there was one question that was the same question in both trials, that when the jury was deliberating, they came and they asked the judge. And what was that question? Anybody want to guess? What is the definition of consent exactly? And what did the judge say in both cases? Well, you need to use your best judgment because there is no state in our United States of America that has a codified definition of consent in our penal code. And we are actively working to change that, partnering with all these amazing folks. So we just taped this last week. It was an amazing discussion. So I want to just show you, it's just about 90 seconds, but it's the impact that we hope to make on survivors across the country. And know that all of you have an opportunity to literally change the lives of your friends and your peers. So this is just a quick 90-second video about our impact with PAVE.
2 years ago, I revealed on American Ninja Warrior that I was sexually assaulted as a kid.
It took such courage to come out and tell that story.
PAVE stands for Promoting Awareness, Victim Empowerment. It wasn't my fault. I've been able to travel the country, hit all these cities, and speaking about my story.
Flip Rodriguez.
Promoting awareness and victim empowerment is so important because PAVE is truly paving the way for a new future and paving a way for so many survivors to be free.
I felt so alone until PAVE came along.
This is the first time that I've seen you tear up.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Because I don't think I could have done it without PAVE.
Please know that our jobs are not done. Your support changes lives. Thank you again.
So there's a couple projects that all of you can do to join the movement and to be involved in what we're trying to do, promoting consent, healthy relationships. I don't think people want to be against abuse or violence. I think they want to be for consent and healthy relationships. I don't think people want to focus on the negative. I think we all want to be a part of the solution. And one way to do that is to participate in PAVE's Consent Is program. So we're going to have some opportunity at the end to allow you to join our network and to find out about these projects. But I'll tell you this, we partnered with a school in DC when I was living in DC several years ago. And this project, Consent Is, was championed by not the women in the school, it was actually by the men. And the captain of the male soccer team took this project on and got all of his guy friends to do it, and this started to grow and grow. And what he said to me, and he allowed me to videotape it, which I was amazed about, he said, I want you to know, Angela, that this project changed the way that my friends and I talk about these issues. We call each other out now when they're using misogynistic language in the weight room. And so, it just promotes what consent means. And so I would love to work with you on this. And then also knowing what to say or do. Studies show that the very first person that a survivor tells, if they react well, that's greatly going to impact the person's healing process. So I love this, again, using the acronym, survivors are brave. B is to believe, always believe. Try saying to the survivor, I believe you, I'm here for you. And probably the most important thing that you could ever say to somebody is it wasn't your fault. There's this thin line, this thread that every single survivor, kind of it connects all of us, is that oftentimes we feel like it's our fault. And so if you can tell that person this wasn't your fault, that could make the world a difference. Resources, let them know that they're not alone. And we're going to give you some resources at the end, but you've got some wonderful resources here at school and in the community and nationwide. Affirmations, offer emotional support. Thank them for sharing. Thank you for your courage. Thank you for sharing this with me. Voices, don't underestimate your value in the role as a listener. Let them use their voice, because after this happened to me, that's all I wanted. I just wanted to have my friends listen to me. I didn't feel like I had changed as a person, but it's very often people don't know what to say or do, so they either are not there for the survivor or they try and fill the space with them talking or trying to, talk it away. But just being a good listener can make such a difference. Empower. Letting the survivors know that they have a voice and they have control, asking them, how can I help you? What do you need from me? We also have this great campaign about victim blaming. You can order a shirt, say this t-shirt is not asking for it, which is very powerful. And again, that comes with knowing what to say and knowing what not to say. Don't ask victim blaming questions. What were you wearing? Why were you there? Well, what were you drinking? Why did you stay? Oftentimes in abusive relationships, we hear from people, well, why did you stay? What not to say. Now we know what not to say. What about what to say? It's not your fault. I'm here for you. How can I support you? And you are not alone. These crimes feel very isolating. And again, every single one of us knows somebody who's been impacted by some type of violence, abuse, or trauma, but nobody wants to talk about it. And I think it's important that we lift that veil and say there is no shame in being a survivor. This is not our fault. This is not our shame. We also know that consent is for everyone, regardless of gender identity or sexual orientation. And in fact, members of the LGBTQIA community are often more at risk for these crimes. And 1 in 2 transgender individuals have experienced sexual assault. And you can set up a PAVE table here at your school. Would love to get some volunteers. And I really want to talk about, especially now with May being Mental Health Awareness Month, talking about self-care, taking a break from tech, walking out into nature, because oftentimes we do see that even as an adult, we do become addicted to our phones. And oftentimes that can take away these wonderful moments with nature. I remember I was on a work call and I ended up saying, okay, well, I need to leave because I just had this feeling. And I walked outside and there was a butterfly that landed on my son's hand. And it was that moment that if I was, immersed in technology, I would have missed that moment. And so taking tech breaks and making sure that we prioritize our own self-care. I did write a book called Hope, Healing, and Happiness, Going Inward to Transform Your Life. And it's a guidebook where it talks about healthy coping mechanisms, how to use positive affirmations to really transform your life. And being present is so important. We also need to recognize the negative self-talk that so many humans have as human beings. When we're really mindful and we listen to the self-talk that we have in our brains to ourselves, oftentimes it's very negative. It's not always very positive. Sometimes we talk to ourselves in a way that we would never talk to our best friends in that same way. We are our worst critic. And so when we can become mindful with a lens of curiosity of where does this come from? Whose voice am I hearing? Why? And letting go of those thoughts intentionally, saying, you know what, I'm going to let these go, but without judgment, saying these thoughts no longer serve me. And consciously replacing it with some affirmation, like when you're stressed out, just saying everything is working out for my greatest good. And knowing that there is a lesson in every negative experience that happens. And for the longest time, I would tell my story and, we talk about these things and people would say in Q&A, well, what's your life like now? And I thought, well, I should put in a slide. Love and joy is absolutely possible after trauma. So I really didn't know what a healthy relationship was growing up. It's not something that we're really taught in school all that much. And so I spent a lot of time researching what's a healthy relationship. And so what I realized I wanted, I believe in the power of Post-it notes. So I put these Post-it notes all over my apartment when I was living in DC saying, and you have to say it in the present tense, even if you don't have it, say it as you have it right now. So I said, I am in a healthy, happy relationship with great communication and dance parties in the kitchen. And I fell in love with my best friend and we got married and we still have dance parties in the kitchen 7 years after our marriage. And now we added 2 more little dance partners to the party. So Those are our kids, and it's just amazing. I think finding love after trauma sometimes can be very difficult for survivors because we have to be vulnerable. A big part of a healthy relationship is learning how to be vulnerable. And so that was a really important life lesson. But now is our time to change the world together. We are back. COVID, I know, was a very difficult time for so many people, especially for young people, and I want to honor that. And so we have an opportunity to really change the world. I do want to talk specifically here about Lake Park and the district of what to do. So raise your hand if you know what Title IX is, or do you want to shout it out? Like, what is Title IX? Does anybody want to speak to that? That's right. Equal access in sports is what Title IX was created for. Level the playing field, making sure that we have equal access in sports. Over the years, it has transitioned, and now it also has helped keep students safe from harassment, abuse, and trauma in schools. So creating a safe learning environment. And so it's grown, and now it's important that we understand that we have a right to have a safe learning environment. And so if any staff member, student, or community member who is a subject to sexual harassment or suspects that someone else is being subject to this should contact the Title IX coordinator. So it's Title IX at lphs.org to report. And when this occurs, the staff member receiving the allegations should immediately contact the Title IX coordinator. But staff members must also remember that the Title IX coordinator determines whether the allegations qualify under it and who's the Title IX coordinator. I bet people probably don't know, right? This is something that's very important. It's the Assistant Superintendent for Educational Services, and there's all of Michael's information. And so it's important for us to know who to talk to when these things happen, because we all deserve a safe learning environment. I also want to leave you with some resources. There's a free 24/7 hotline, and it's 1-800-656-HOPE. PAVE actually launched this last December because we saw so much violence, abuse, and trauma during COVID was numbers like we've never seen. And so we really wanted to meet that need, and so we created survivors.org, helping survivors thrive after trauma. We actually created a billboard in Times Square. We had millions of survivors that were walking through Times Square see this and get help, which is so profound and amazing. The Suicide Prevention Lifeline is there, easy to remember, 1-800-273-TALK. Loveisrespect.org, a great organization that we partner with, helping with teen dating violence and healthy relationships, and children's advocacy centers. So we're going to take some time for Q&A. I don't want to be talking at you the whole time, but I do encourage you to please take out your cell phones. Most of you probably know how to do a QR code, but I'll tell you if you don't, you just open your camera app on your phone. And it's very important for me to get feedback. I want to hear from you. What did you like? What did you learn? What could we do better? So if you can scan that from the audience, or for anybody watching at home, if you can scan that from your cell phone, and there's just a couple of questions. So while we're doing Q&A, if you could scan that and answer those questions, I would be profoundly grateful. So now we want to open it up to Q&A for the time that we have together. Don't be shy. Want to hear from you. Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. That's an excellent question. For anybody in the back that didn't hear, her question was about toxic masculinity. So toxic masculinity is when men don't feel like they have a way to be vulnerable, and that they need to prove their quote-unquote manhood by violence, abuse, and aggression. I am all about chivalrous. My husband, he grew up in the South. If he didn't hold the door open for his Mima and his mom, forget about it. So when we first started dating, he would open the car door for me, which I thought was weird because I didn't really have that before. And I was like, no, I'm good. And then I'm like, no, this is actually amazing. He pulled the chair out for me at dinner. I'm like, so yes, yay to chivalry. Boo to keep asking until you get what you want. If somebody says no, if you're in an intimate situation and your partner says no, no doesn't mean keep asking. No means stop. And so often in Hollywood, we see that, it's like encouraging boys to keep pressing on until they get this kind of conquest, if you will. And so there's a lack of respect, a lack of consent, and toxic masculinity. And Terry Crews does an amazing job talking about this, and he's also a male survivor. And he is a guy's guy, right? He played in the NFL. He's the host of America's Got Talent. And so, he talks a lot about toxic masculinity and how hard it was for him to even understand, like, the importance of vulnerability for men, that it is okay for men to cry and it is okay for women to be strong. We don't have to be in these gender stereotypes. So I would encourage you to Google, if you Google Terry Crews plus toxic masculinity, he has a lot of different videos, and I think he does a really good job as a man talking about that. But that's an excellent question. Thank you. What else? Yes, ma'am. I would love to speak to that, because that is an issue that she asked about, the issue of pornography. That absolutely needs to be addressed, and I did leave it out of this. At conferences, I do speak about it, but I didn't know if it would be too much. But we know that the average age of coming in contact with pornography is 7, 8, and 9 years old. People don't want to believe that this is happening, and so we're not talking to our children about this. But the problem is, it is changing the neural pathways in brains and it really changes what's normal. Oftentimes, pornography is very violent. There's no consent. It's not what a loving, healthy, consensual sexual interaction would be or should be. And so a lot of times, young people think that these images are what is a normal sexual interaction, and it is very far from that. So thank you for bringing that up. It is one of the biggest problems, I think, in our culture. I think that I actually went to a really interesting, Ron Jeremy was like a big porn star back in the 70s. He did a tour with a preacher. It was called XXX something, but it was basically a debate from, somebody who's been in the industry with somebody who is preaching against it. And so it was a really interesting dialogue, but what they both agreed on is that it absolutely can become an addiction. And that's not something we're talking about or teaching our children. So, one of the things that I like to talk about when we do talk about pornography is letting kids and our kids know that if you see an image, like maybe we can't control everything that they see, but telling them the dangers of watching this and telling them to turn away. So we might be able to control our students' phones, but we're not going to, one of their friends might have that. So letting them know how harmful it is and letting them know that that is not normal. So great question. Is there anything that you wanted to add to that? That's a very important question. Yes. Yeah, no, and absolutely. I think, and I don't think that parents understand how much is being consumed by children, and not, we won't even talk about, child pornography, which is obviously a huge problem too, but I'm just talking about, Pornhub and these things. Like, kids are watching this, whether we want to think about it or not. I mean, now my journey has come full circle. Now that I'm a mom, I have to think about these things, and so, and not only did you mention, does this hurt women's self-esteem, but so does magazines. And, that's a whole nother presentation that we've talked about before is, the way in which we paint women where, you see these things and these images in magazines, that's not real or normal. All of that is photoshopped, and so it's like teaching girls and women, what beauty should be or could be, and all of it is fake. I mean, same thing with all the filters on Instagram and Snapchat. So I think just, really focusing on your family values is so important. Letting, just reminding your kids what is valued and important in your house, I think, too. So thank you. That was an excellent question. Thank you for bringing that up. I appreciate that. What else? Yes, please. Please, I'd appreciate it. Yes. Yes. And I think what you mentioned spot on is age appropriate. There are age appropriate ways to start these conversations, and not even in a sexual way, but start at age 2. Consent doesn't have to be a sexual conversation. So I personally wholeheartedly appreciate these things, these concepts being taught, safe versus unsafe secrets. You know, a lot of times perpetrators will use secrets as a tool to, you know, so there's ways that you can do that without it being a sexual conversation. And so actually, you brought up the law. So Erin's law, Erin's one of my best friends, actually. We now are raising our babies together. We've known each other for over a decade, probably 15 years now. But she created Erin's law, which is promoting age-appropriate sexual abuse prevention education. The problem is there's so many different types of curriculum out there. And so what PAVE would like to do in the future, I've talked to Erin about this, there is no research-based free educational model that could use cartoons to talk about safe versus unsafe secrets, you know, different ways to talk about these things. But every school district around the country has different ways in which these things are discussed. So I know there's ways that parents can opt out if they want to, but the problem is a lot of times this abuse is happening at home with the secrets and such. So so I'm full on for it if it's done, like you said, in an age appropriate way, and there's ways to do that. So that's a great question. Yeah. Yes. The age of consent, yes. And so it's interesting, it's a great question for those of you in the back were the age of consent. And what's interesting is that it does vary state by state. And so you're right, in terms of like the penal code, that's really the only way that consent is defined is the age. It doesn't talk about any of the freely given or all those other pieces. So there was a case that we worked on, I don't know if you all remember a couple years ago, there was a young woman who was abused at the St. Paul School, very prestigious private prep school on the East Coast. Her name was Chessie Prout, and she was raped. She was a freshman and was assaulted by a senior boy. And the question was, you know, she talked about how she didn't consent, but the only thing that he could be held accountable for, because the criminal justice system can be difficult, and that was the age of consent. And so he was held accountable for statutory rape, is what they call that, if you engage in sexual contact with someone under the age of, you know, whatever age it is in the state. But while we're on the subject, I think it's important for people to know and for us to talk about mandate reporting. So if you talk to a teacher at your school about maybe something that's happening at home, it's important for all of us to know that it is their job, and rightfully so, to report that. So any student that reports to a teacher, all teachers at this is across the country, they are all mandate reporters. And I think that's important. So we have a lot of materials. We actually have a lot of materials in the back on parents. If something happens to your child, what to say or do if they disclose. And these are materials that teachers can use on what to say or do as well. But that's really important as well. So thank you for bringing that up. Yeah. Sure. Oh, not considered, right. Right. Could be considered a crime. I mean, it really, and that's the hard part. It's like, would it be? Could it be? I mean, it's again nuance, and that's why I think having these conversations, you know, knowing again, I think that just goes back to family values, because oftentimes we're talking to these students and we're hearing boots on the ground that, and this can happen from both genders. It doesn't have to be just women, but that young people are feeling pressured to do things that they don't necessarily want to do. They don't feel like they have a voice, or, they feel like they want to fit in, so they don't feel like they can say no, or to not do certain things, in an intimate way. And so I think that also is, you talked about it before, but like self-esteem, is teaching self-esteem to young people, to say like, you don't need to engage in things that your friends are engaging in if that's not something that you're comfortable with. That's true for drinking, that's true for intimacy, that's true for anything. And there's same thing for digital. I mean, people are doing certain things digitally that they don't want to do as well, because they feel like it's the cool thing or what their friends are doing. And so I think for any parent that's here, that's watching at home, is just really talking to your child about your family values, and to always, you have that inner knowing of what's comfortable for you and what's not. And even for me, I mean, this is obviously a little bit different, but even when I was leaving my job and I saw this stranger behind me, I knew that something was wrong. All of my internal alarms were going off. And what did I do? I ignored it, because I didn't want to make a big deal. I'm like, I was singing out loud. I love music. I play guitar and sing. I was carrying a Natalie Merchant CD back, in my hand, and I'm walking in my car and I'm singing, and I'm, he was maybe 10 feet behind me, and all of my internal alarms are blazing, saying, run, go, get away. And I remember feeling my cheeks turn bright red, and I just ignored it. And in a second, I was captured. And so, human beings are the only mammals on the planet that don't listen to their instincts. And I think a lot of that is because of these gender stereotypes. Women are taught to be, you don't want to make somebody's feelings hurt. I mean, these, again, stereotypes, but, I didn't want to hurt the guy's feelings. What am I going to do, run away? It's like, I didn't want him to feel bad. It's like, well, then all of a sudden I'm faced with what I was faced with. So I think, again, it's all that. Yes? Elizabeth Smart. Yes. Yes. That's right. To use our voice or to run away. Yes, absolutely. And I don't want to discourage people from talking about stranger danger. I mean, I don't want that to be lost on us. I think we absolutely do need to talk about following our gut instinct and being aware of our surroundings. Headphones weren't really a thing, maybe Walkmans back in the day, but, but really being aware of your surroundings is critically important. But the stranger danger is such a small portion. It does happen, so I don't want that to be lost on any of us. Absolutely. Follow your gut, know your surroundings. It was broad daylight when it happened to me. I mean, I was on my way to a graduation party with my friends. I mean, you don't think that things like that are going to happen in broad daylight, in like an affluent suburb, at a mall when you're leaving your job. I had just maybe 6 months before borrowed/stole my parents' car and drove to Memphis, Tennessee when I was in high school, walking the streets of Beale Street at night. Like, things can happen anywhere at any time, right? And so I think it's important for us not to blame ourselves or our kid. And let me just say now again that I'm a parent, I see so often that parents do blame their children, and it's not their fault. Parents, we feel like it's our job to protect our children. So oftentimes when survivors do disclose to their parents, the parent says things like, oh, why were you there? I told you not to do that. Or it's just like this sort of knee-jerk reaction because it's a defense mechanism. We feel guilty because this happened to our kid. And so we need to really remember that in the back of our minds, not to do that, because it happens so often. It's not something that, it happens automatically. And it happens, I would say, most of the time. We've dealt with thousands and thousands of survivors. And overwhelmingly, parents, at some point or another, will say something very victim-blaming. It's not the parent's fault. We don't teach these things of what to say or do. And again, it's just that defense mechanism. So anyway, neither here nor there, but an important point, I think, to hammer home. But this has been great. Does anybody else have any questions? Otherwise, I'd like to stay around, and we've got some materials in the back and would love to meet you personally. And please make sure if you haven't done this, please scan this code. Would love to hear from you. Your feedback means so much to me. It's really important that I hear from you of, what made a difference, what would you like to hear more of, what could we do better, and so that's really important. But I do want to leave you with a quote, and it's from Margaret Mead, which is, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." Thank you all so much for coming tonight. You can find us on social media at PAVE Info, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, now TikTok. Would love to make sure that you join the movement. Thank you all so much, and thank you, Lake Park, for bringing me back home.
Two years ago, I revealed on American Ninja Warrior that I was sexually assaulted as a kid.
It took such courage to come out and tell that story.
PAVE stands for Promoting Awareness, Victim Empowerment. It wasn't my fault. I've been able to travel the country, hit all these cities, and speaking about my story.
Promoting awareness and victim empowerment is so important because PAVE is truly paving the way for a new future and paving a way for so many survivors to be free.
I felt so alone until PAVE came along.
This is the first time that I've seen you tear up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Why is that?
Because I don't think I could have done it without PAVE.
Please know that our jobs are not done. Your support changes lives. Thank you again.